Welcome to State Scoop's Priorities podcast. Every Wednesday, you'll get insights into the state and local government community, hear from top leaders, and learn about the latest news and trends across the industry. I'm your host, Sophia Fox-Sowell. Here's what's happening this week. Starlink, the satellite internet service operated by Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, is seeing significant adoption across all levels of government, often through resellers rather than direct sales. Experts told reporters from FedScoop and StateScoop that while federal, state, and local agencies are finding value in using the service in remote and disaster-stricken areas, some criticize Starlink's poor customer service and question Musk's reliability as the company's leader. Several New York departments proposed their first ever cybersecurity rules for water and wastewater utilities. They would include requiring annual vulnerability assessments, formal cybersecurity programs, and incident response plans. Large utilities would also need to hire a dedicated manager to monitor network activity. To help utilities comply with the upcoming regulations, the state is also launching a $2.5 million grant program. San Jose recently finished a 10-week AI upskilling program, which helps city employees build practical AI tools that streamline everyday city operations, like helping secure federal grants or label thousands of previously uncategorized 311 requests. According to city officials, the program has increased productivity by 20%, saved over 10,000 work hours, and eliminated an estimated $50,000 in consulting expenses. California lawmakers are advancing legislation to address the harms of AI companion chatbots, systems designed to simulate human-like relationships and provide emotional support. They're often marketed to vulnerable users like children and those in emotional distress, like Sewell Setzer, a Florida teen who took his life in 2024 after developing an unhealthy relationship with an AI companion chatbot from Character.ai. If passed, the California bill would require companies running companion chatbots to frequently remind users that they're talking to a machine, not a person, and that chatbots may not be suitable for minors. The bill also encourages companies to avoid using addictive tricks that reward prolonged engagement. Peter Furlong, a senior policy analyst at the Center for Humane Technology, helps break down the complexities of defining AI companion chatbots, how generative AI has made these bots more immersive and human-like, and why more parents and lawmakers may not even be aware of this technology.
Before we get going and talk about the legislation that's moving through California's legal system and its, legislature, I'd love it if you could define what an AI companion chatbot is.
Yeah, so I think, the issue of definitions with AI companion chatbot is really a complex issue. And I think that it's a complex issue that legislators are trying to understand as well. And you see that reflected in, the ways that definitions have changed a little bit, and the ways in which kind of the boundaries between a traditional AI chatbot, something like ChatGPT, and something that's like maybe more obviously an AI companion chatbot like Character AI are kind of blurring. And so, what qualifies as an AI companion chatbot, I think, is a complex issue because it really comes down to, well, what are people using these chatbots for? And I think we're seeing that people are using kind of this full spectrum of AI chatbots for companionship. So I think it's important that we understand that when we think about how do we define, AI companion chatbots, how do we define that in the context of regulation as well?
For sure. I guess in layman's terms, for somebody who may not have heard of what this is, can you describe it then?
Yeah, sure. So it's an AI chatbot that, engages in a very conversational style, in which, people are using it for, a wide variety of, maybe not necessarily traditional productive use cases. So talking through their feelings, expressing companionship and friendship. You'll see, some are marketed as like a fictional boyfriend or a fictional therapist that users can confide in. So really offering, users the promise of, something fun to engage with, the chance to feel less alone, things like that.
Hmm. How long has this particular type of chatbot been kind of prominent in society? Like, when did it first come about?
Yeah, so I think that they've existed for a good 10 years or so in some capacity. They've really exploded onto the scene with the emergence of generative AI and the emergence of large language models as something that has taken, AI companion chatbots from a relatively simple technology to something that's highly immersive and highly human-like and very engaging for users.
Can you explain how generative AI kind of sped up how much more sophisticated this technology has gotten?
Yeah, so kind of the foundational underpinnings of generative AI is, a technology people refer to as like large language models, which basically are tools that are really good at generating text. And they're good at generating, very human-like text. And obviously that's like foundational to a chatbot that's engaging, a chatbot that's highly relational. And so you've seen a lot of design features emerge in this space that make, highly conversational AI chatbots something that we've seen a lot more of.
Hmm. And in my research for in doing the story, I wrote about it last week. California has introduced a new bill, SB 243, by Senator Steve Padilla, which would require these AI companion chatbots and these companies to issue a warning to users that they are, communicating with a machine and not a person, with like irregular periods of windows, and also making a disclaimer for in case a minor is using it that this particular tool might not be suitable for minors. And in my research, I was surprised to learn that there wasn't a lot of regulation or policy frameworks around protecting children or regulating this specific type of technology. Can you explain why there's kind of a gap in terms of policy regulations surrounding this particular type of chatbot?
Yeah, so I think that gap in regulation can, at least in part, be explained by honestly just a gap in awareness and a gap in exposure to these harms. So really, I would say before, uh, the primary lawsuit against Character AI, so, Megan Garcia's case and Sewell Setzer's story emerged, the harms to kids from AI chatbots were not really well known, whether that's by parents, by educators or lawmakers alike. And in the time since this story has gone viral, we've seen a ton of different state lawmakers across the country quickly respond with a variety of different bills that are attempting to protect kids from the harms that Sewell experienced, um, which is something that we're excited to see. But the reality is, the legislative process is pretty slow, and lawmakers are up against a lot of competing priorities, short legislative sessions, and they face a ton of strong lobbying and advocacy efforts from AI companies as well.
Yeah, and I want to touch on all of that specifically on the opposition, but I want to go back to the inspiration for a lot of the new legislation that we're seeing introduced, which is, Sewell Sutter's case, in which he formed a really unhealthy attachment to a chatbot on Character.ai. And he was expressing, thoughts of self-harm, and he eventually did take his own life. I'm curious, for these companies, I know engagement is the primary goal and motivation to continue capturing attention. But when these words come out, I would think that it would trigger some type of warning to a suicide hotline, maybe any type of triggers for engineers or people behind the company to like look at this conversation in text, parental warnings. I don't understand why these kind of were in place. They seem very normal.
Yeah, sure. And that's something that we see across a variety of different technologies as well. But I think it's maybe important to take a step back a little bit and
Mhm.
understand, the value and the potential of things like content filters like this, right? And so I think that content filters are very useful, an important piece of this technology, but they're imperfect, right? They can't capture everything. They don't capture the ways that, users can pretty easily get around them. Um, and, they require a lot of technical effort to implement. And we've seen all of this with like the content moderation discussions on social media as well, right? Like capturing specific content and addressing that is a huge challenge. And so, that's where when we look at the challenges here, we like to shift the attention onto the initial design of the technology itself, and understanding the ways in which, that initial design has led to the potential harms that we see here. And we think that
Mm.
there's, a lot of things that technologists and even lawmakers can do to try to shift the way that that initial design process is done.
Oh, please say more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's, a lot of design features that we're seeing from companies that emphasize exactly what you're saying, this highly engagement-based business model, and also, a highly human-like design, right? The goal is to mimic very human-to-human interactions to build something that's highly captivating and highly engaging for users. And so we see design choices across the stages of development made by companies that build towards this. So this includes things like the choice of highly conversational and even potentially explicit content in model training. It includes the use of processes like preference alignment, which is a process by which models are fine-tuned in order to align
Mhm.
with users' requests. Something that inherently seems like a good idea, but has been demonstrated to lead to negative effects like model sycophancy, which is something that's been behind a lot of the harms that we're seeing. It also includes like the end user experience as well, which mimics human conversations through the use of things like speech disfluencies, even like things like an ellipsis when the model's generating a response. And you'll even see that the user interface mirrors that of standard human to human messaging apps.
Hmm. Hmm. When you say sycophancies, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, preference alignment is this process by which, you know, you want to try to steer a model to give people responses that they want.
Mhm.
And the effect of this is what we call model sycophancy. So the idea is that, the model will give you responses that you want, which means it may not necessarily give you accurate or factual responses. It may not necessarily give you hard truths or resources or information that you need. And that's important when users are talking about things like self-harm. They're talking about complex mental health issues, right? And just in the same way that sycophancy can be challenging and problematic in real life and real human to human relationships, we see that challenge with human and AI relationships as well.
Yeah, and I would think it might be exponentially harder to get out of it, especially because a lot of these platforms are targeted towards kids. It feels like their main demographic that they want to capture and bring into to the fold is between what 10 and 14-year olds. And I worry that that type of behavior and targeting feels very predatory, especially when you think about these kids who might not have the critical thinking skills. They might be feeling lonely. They might be feeling bullied at school. Like they are really not just the target demographic for these platforms to form unhealthy attachment, but to also kind of form the type of sycophant relationship that you're describing.
Yeah, exactly. And, kids are inherently in a difficult time in life in terms of development and, building relational skills. And it's easy to see how turning to an AI that just tells you what you want to hear is something, that's really attractive to kids and admittedly really attractive to adults as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it would be wonderful if you could talk to somebody all day that could only tell you what you wanted to hear. That would make my life a lot easier and in certain ways. I'm curious. We talked about how these businesses have the model that's predicated on engagement. Um, A lot of AI companies, as you mentioned, they push back on this type of regulation because they say it stifles innovation. In your work and your research, if they were to design a platform like this without it being on the basis, their business model being on the basis of engagement, do you think they'd still be able to find success while being able to protect their users?
Well, I mean, I think we hear a lot about the promise of AI and the promise of AI to transform a lot of aspects of our life. And I think, it's fair to look at a lot of these AI companion chatbots and the experiences of folks like Sewell and think critically about, does that align with the promise of AI? And does that align with the innovation, that we've been sold? And I think, it's fair to question that. And I think there's a lot of agreement and, definitively bipartisan agreement that the products that we're seeing in this space that harm children and harm American consumers are not in our best interests, and they don't meet, American ideals of innovation. That's not
Hmm.
to say that AI can't be a part of our future, but as it's been conceived here, I think is really the concern.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to go back to something you said about awareness as well, where parents, teachers, school administrators, lawmakers, people who have the power to sort of look out for these types of behaviors might not be aware that this technology, these platforms even exist. What responsibilities do government, do people in these positions have to be a little bit more aware and alert parents and kids of tools like this?
Yeah, so actually, Megan Garcia in the character technologies case, Megan's talked a lot about the steps she took to protect her own kids from the harms of social media, and really, following the instructions set out by tech companies for us and for parents. And really, she did all the things that she was supposed to do. Yet she, like many others, was unprepared for the impact of products like character AI. And I think it really raises the point that it can't just be up to parents and it can't just be up to schools to manage these risks. Like AI developers need to better understand and address the harms from their products, and policymakers should be moving quickly to prevent similar tragedies in this space.
I know the Center for Humane Technology does work with a lot of lawmakers, having them understand, identify, and possibly regulate this type of technology. What have you seen from tech companies? Are any stepping up to input or built in better protections for children that are using their products?
I think that we're seeing tech companies promote, you know, different approaches, things like parental controls, things like time limits. But what we're not necessarily seeing is the, core design changes that can promote safer technologies. And so that's something that, we'll continue to advocate for. And I think, both for tech companies and for lawmakers as well.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to see that this is one of the few bipartisan issues that it seems like everyone can agree on.
Yeah, I know. And I think that that's important, right? Whether it's the federal level, whether it's the state level. I mean, we've seen proposals from, California, New York, North Carolina, Utah. I mean, this is something that everyone seems to understand and, folks want to protect kids, and it's a priority here.
That was Peter Furlong with the Center for Humane Technology. I also spoke with Rob Elveld, co founder of the nonprofit Transparency Coalition. He says the lack of AI regulation is partly due to a disparity in legislative resources across states, noting that most have short sessions and limited staff. Elveld also stressed the urgency of regulating AI, criticizing the lack of federal regulation, attributing it to the tech lobby's influence.
Why do you think state lawmakers need this extra support and help to try and educate them on the perils of AI and the need for regulation?
There's a range of state sort of legislative time and staffing, I guess I would say. And at the very low end of the range, We worked in 10 states last year, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of 50 states, but broadly stated, 45-ish states have a 2 to 4.5 month legislative session. Okay. Very different from California's, which goes from January to August, and then the governor has the month of September. So it's really a 9 month session. Okay. Um, New York's on the higher end, Texas on the higher end, but most of them are very short. And um, you know, on that low end of the sort of time and investment spectrum, New Mexico, every state elected official is volunteer, and they have no staff. Okay. The vast majority, 45 states have one staff, 45 give or take states have one staffer per elected official, if that. And that's primarily a scheduler. It's certainly not someone who's would be titled a legislative director. It might be a chief of staff, but it's primarily a scheduler. But no one who could sort of draft legislation or do staff work or that sort of thing. So there's just, and the state elected officials themselves, um, they cover a huge range of issues, and most of them don't have a tech background. And this is fast moving. This is, fast moving technology, and they need some backup somewhere of people that spend most of their days thinking about this challenge in terms of both, how fast the tech is moving, how to keep up with it, what the regulations might need to be, at least to protect kids and more broadly citizens. Both constituencies are really not represented at all by anyone else. And so that's what we're there to do, is just try and back up state legislators who really feel strongly that there's a need, but just don't have the time or the technical expertise, merging with kind of the bill and legal expertise to put in place legislation without some support.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially as you mentioned, artificial intelligence is a rapidly evolving technology, moving faster than I think anyone anticipated. And oftentimes, state legislatures, like you said, are at a disadvantage because they don't have the resources, whether it's the staff or the technical knowledge to really get a grasp on how to write regulations or proposals to kind of get this technology in check so it can protect its constituents. And the legislation in California introduced by, Senator Steve Padilla would really require companies running this type of platform, that having it be accessible to its users to create an avatar of sorts and customize this companion. They would be required to remind users at the start of the legislation that they are speaking with a non-human, basically a machine, and they'd also be required to warn users that that these chatbots might not be suitable for minors. In your experience, and I know you've only been doing this for 20 months, why is it that there's a lack of regulation around this specific type of tool?
Why have we gone 20 years without regulating without regulating social media, even though Mark Zuckerberg's been forced to testify in front of Congress like 8 times and apologize to parents? I mean, it's pathetic. So
Yeah.
why? There's, we created Transparency Coalition because there was a gap in the legal and regulatory realm of uh, over the past 20 or 25 years, especially on consumer-focused applications, okay, where there's been almost no accountability. And, that's resulted in, if you read Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation, or you talk to any parent my age, I've got kids age 19, 21, and 23. They are suffering badly from their generation is from a failed policy experiment 20 years on now of not regulating social media and hoping that the social media titans would do right by our kids and our people in the context of they're still running their business. And that has proven time and again not to be the case. Those companies will do only what's in their best interest. And it's not protecting kids and it's not protecting citizens. And so that's why.
Yeah, it does seem like over the past 2 decades, I mean, social media has there obviously there's some pros, there are some cons, but it's really coming to light how detrimental and addictive it is, especially to young people in terms of their mental health, and their ability to have these social relationships outside of screens and in the real world. But bringing it back to AI companions, there was that report from the MIT Media Lab that said that AI companions are even more addictive or shown to be more addictive than social media. Do you think that's why they target younger kids, ages 10 to 14, to make these companions and make it seem more appealing and attractive to kids rather than focusing their attentions on maybe adults that are a little bit more discerning and have these critical thinking skills?
There's um, First of all, there's an MIT report. There's already a bunch of reports showing that these chatbots are more addictive than kids. You cited one of them, but they're coming up very quickly. Um, there are AI chatbots focused on all sorts of things, not just kids. Okay. So there's AI chatbots purporting to be mental health companions, or um, or you know experts in one field or another, other sorts of healthcare, that sort of thing. But there's a category of them that are generally just trying to sort of be a companion, and those a fairly broad category of them. And those are driven by the same metric that's driven social media and Facebook and Instagram for the past 20 years. It's a metric called engagement, which is a euphemism for addiction. And so it is easier to addict kids than it is adults. They're less discerning. They're more malleable. Um, they are far less sophisticated in their interactions to know what's a human and what's not. They can be easily enticed by things that they don't understand well, like sexually charged interactions and things like that. But they're following these companies are following the same playbook that the cigarette companies targeted in the 80s, which was targeting kids and young teens with ads that made cigarettes look cool and so forth. And you know, because the younger you can addict them, the longer you've got an ongoing customer that will, continue to pay for you, be profitable for your company.
Hmm. That seems to be the mantra that we've seen over the years, especially with technology, how predatory these companies are willing to be if it helps them reach their bottom line, even so far as to target children.
Yeah.
California's legislation is inspired by the Florida teen, Sewell Seltzer, or Sutter, that took his life last year because he had created and developed an unhealthy relationship with a companion chatbot. I heard his mother speak with you on the stage last week. I'm curious, as a parent yourself and somebody who is actively participant and looking and trying to support and encourage this type of regulation. California's bill targets these companies and would create requirements so that they can have trigger warnings if somebody expresses, self-harm. What do you think these companies need to do in terms of targeting parents and educating them, or governments? How do they need to educate parents to be a little bit more aware and mindful of the tools and technology that these companies are using and their kids could possibly be using?
I don't think they're going to do any warning of parents unless they're compelled to do it. Period. Pure and simple. Um, there's been no warning labels on social media for 20 years, and a lot of parents know about that. And so it's not going to happen here either. Um, we're partnered with a number of organizations, and an increasing number of organizations that are trying to get the nonprofits primarily, that are trying to get the word out broadly to parents and kids. I mean, I hadn't heard of an AI chatbot until I first read about the lawsuit that Megan Garcia had, the mom that you just discussed, had brought against Character.ai. So, there's, and my kids are a little bit past the age that is in the target zone for addiction, and they're further along. It's not to say that they're not susceptible to these character AI or the many offshoots of products like that. But a lot of parents just don't know this exists. I mean, there isn't a parent I know of, and I live in Seattle, so this is a city where there's a lot of parents that have worked for Microsoft or Amazon. I can't think of a parent I know, hundreds, that would know that 20 million people use Character.ai. That was the number, 9 months ago. So it's probably increased since then. But there's a really big disconnect. But any kid 15 knows about, or 14 knows about Character AI, which is really scary. You know what I'm saying? In other words, they're figuring out how to propagate their product to kids through a bunch of channels that parents don't even know about.
Gosh, that feels so terrifying to hear. I had no idea the number
Yeah.
was that large, especially if that stat is, almost a year old
Yeah.
at this point. That is such a large swath of the population, and especially Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as we were mentioning, they're having a lot of trouble in the real world forming healthy relationships in person, and so they're relying very heavily on these parasocial relationships, and especially if parents who are a generation or two removed from not only the technology but even seeing the appeal of wanting to choose to speak with somebody who isn't real versus somebody who could be real, a real friend, a real
Yeah.
mentor, a real someone in the real world. That's so hard to combat, to look out for. Or do you think there's any signs or patterns that parents can see in their children that might give them a little tip that their kids are developing an unhealthy relationship like this?
Well, unfortunately, part of parenting has become talking to and warning your kids about various types of online products, starting with social media, but also, there's a lot of addiction incenting, uh, things related to video games. Again, you can game an hour a day, fine, but you can also become completely addicted to gaming and do it 6 or 8 hours a day and not sleep and miss school or miss work. And so part of parenting has become warning your kids and trying to support your kids around all of these online products targeted them. And unfortunately, you know, in this current unregulated environment for chatbots, you need to be warning your 10-year-old about it. And um, there's parallel efforts underway. I'm a big believer in the phone-free schools that the Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt, again, his organization, and a number of other parent-focused organizations are pushing. But that doesn't help in the after hours, after school, in the evening, or whatever. But it's still a very big step in the right direction in terms of interacting with people at school, not your phone. And as a middle schooler or a high schooler, and so there's, as a society, we're wrestling with this, and the technology, moves far faster than the society and or the legislative process can move. But one of the reasons that my co-founder Jay Geisma and I founded Transparency Coalition is we just could not have another sort of product category, artificial intelligence broadly stated, of which, AI chatbots is a subset. We just couldn't let this entire thing go by for 20 years without regulating it like we did with social media. We have to, as a country, at both the state and the federal level, develop some level of muscle to um, put elected officials in the job of regulating, which is their focus. Because they represent citizens, they're elected by citizens, and to think that companies or boards of directors for companies will do right by citizens, it is absolutely not the case. For sure not. And we've seen time after time it's not.
Hmm. Because these board of directors, these private companies, like they have a bottom line, they have a responsibility to their shareholders, or so they say. And a lot of times, pushback on any type of regulation in the tech industry, be it social media, AI chatbots, or any other emerging technology, it feels like the go-to opposition response from these tech companies is this is going to hurt us. This is going to hurt Americans. This is going to stifle innovation. It's going to put us further behind the rest of the world. What do you say to some of that opposition argument?
Before I was doing this, I've been a tech CEO 4 times over. And I've been a founder of one company. I've been a number two employee of another company. The companies I've run vary from kind of a couple of them 20 to 40 employees. The largest one I ran was that's 250, and then it was acquired by MasterCard, and I was running a 500-person business unit. But generally speaking, small to medium-sized businesses. And we are not trying to stifle innovation, and innovation is not being stifled in this country. We are really trying to, especially on broad-based, consumer-focused technology, represent and protect consumers and kids. There is a huge amount of innovation going on in AI that is not being regulated or will be regulated later as it relates to a certain business effort or so forth. But these broad-based tools focused on consumers and focused on kids, there was a nonprofit that recently put out a report, written example screenshots of in 50 different states. They sent it to all 50 attorneys general plus the federal attorney general's office, of how these AI chatbots were representing that they were licensed therapists, including giving a license number, because they've got, in all of the training data that's been sucked in, they have license numbers of various, registered therapists in every state. So they're throwing up their license numbers. So this is the kind of thing that these products are very clearly misrepresenting what they do, what they are. They're trying to look like people. They're trying to trick kids into being people, and they're very pernicious. And their number one goal is addiction, under this engagement term, which is again a euphemism for addiction.
Yeah, I love that we're reframing that word because you're right that it's exactly what it is. Because the longer you're engaged with this tool, the more money that they can generate and profit off of you, the more they can profit off your attention span and your deteriorating mental health. So one of the last questions that I have for you, you mentioned briefly in your answer previously, is that there's an absence of federal regulation. A lot of this work in terms of trying to develop AI policies is specifically coming down to the states. Why is there a lack of federal regulation, especially with such a rapidly like evolving technology? You would think that the federal regulation would, like, or the federal government would want to get ahead of some of this so states and set the standards so states can kind of follow them. Why is it that states are sort of rising to the occasion and not the federal government?
The tech lobby has DC wired, pure and simple. DC is driven by big money because takes more and more money every cycle to drive your campaign. And if you're not getting funded by the tech lobby, then your competitor, the person you're competing against in that election is. And so the bigger the campaign, the more money you need to raise, the more the tech lobby has you in its back pockets. The biggest lobbyist in DC these days by a long way. And we have found that the state legislatures are much closer to their constituents. They're seeing the harms and the pains. The state lawmakers have time to go to various PTA meetings or community meetings. They feel their constituents' challenges and pains much more. They're more responsive to them, and there's just not as much money in state politics as in. Believe me, we're getting outspent on every bill. We supported 25 bills in 10 states this year at some level. Some were testifying for, some were doing bill review, some were putting in letters of support. But generally, we try and partner with bill authors in various states and support their efforts in whatever they need to help their bill through. And every bill that's being put forward, it's the opposition from the various tech surrogates, TechNet, NetChoice, Chamber for Progress, these organizations are all basically funded by 4 or 5 companies. 70% of their funding comes from the same 4 or 5 or 6 companies, and so they're effectively owned by those companies. They're just different mouthpieces. Plus, you've got direct lobbyists from Meta and Google and you name it. And so uh, we find that the states are just more attuned to their citizens' needs. There's a willingness to do things, to pass a bill in a state and then iterate the next year, amend that bill the next year, because they're on short timelines. They don't have as much. They're not trying to get it perfect each time, and so there's, let's get a bill that's imperfect, but it's a starting point, and then we can mend it next year as we learn more about the technology, as opposed to federally, we're still operating under the 1996 Telecommunications Act and Section 230, which gave all of the social media companies a blank check to not care what happens to their customers, because what Section 230 said is if you're hosting a platform, you're not responsible for what's posted on that platform. So there's been no accountability for the social media companies for 20 years. Anything can be posted up there. That's not my problem. And so anyway, for a bunch of reasons, the states are more agile. They're more, surprisingly, they're far more protective of kids. This is very bipartisan or nonpartisan, however you want to say it. But Arkansas, Utah, Nebraska are increasingly, these are some companies that have passed social media bills protecting kids. It's generally the category would be called kids code. Along with Vermont, California's had a kids code bill in place for a while. Meta's tackling all of these up in court as long as they can, delay. But this is a bipartisan effort across states to protect kids. There is well-deserved distrust of the largest tech companies, starting with Meta, and there should be. And so the state officials know well that their constituents are not being looked after by those companies. And so that's what we see out there. That's what we feel day to day. You also just in the states, even as politically charged as everything in these days, there's just more of an effort. There's more of a dialogue and a bipartisan effort. Sure, the state legislatures are either they're majority Democrat or majority Republican, but inside of a given state, there's generally work done on a bipartisan basis, even if the votes end up being driven by one caucus or the other. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense the way you're explaining to it, because at the top, there's so much money circulating, and these politicians are so much further removed than state legislatures that have a more direct relationship with their constituents, and I guess are more either courageous or willing to put forward any type of
Both of
proposal or
those things.
bill.
Both
Yes.
of those things.
Any type of proposal or starting point to just do something and not just sit on their hands and wait for a bill to be perfect or the regulation to be perfect, to just give everyone the starting point to really do well by their constituents and to work with people across the aisle to do this, because as you said, it is a bipartisan effort because everyone cares about protecting kids except for some of these tech companies, it sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that, there was an effort by a small number of politicians funded by the tech lobby to put this 10-year artificial intelligence legislative moratorium in the reconciliation bill. And there was a bipartisan effort on the last night that the Senate heard that bill, led by Senator Blackburn on the Republican side and Senator Cantwell on the Democratic side, to strip that out, and it ultimately was stripped out with a 99-1 vote. So there was a recognition that we're not going to be able to protect our kids. The states are protecting kids. I think Senator Blackburn gave a very concise summary that basically said it's been very frustrating. We haven't at the federal level been able to protect our kids and put legislation in place, but that is happening in the states, and we cannot take away their right to protect our kids. And so, for your listeners out there, that's going to come back around. We have got to, until the federal government can get their act together at the U.S. Congress level and protect our kids, we've got to be able to do it at the state level in terms of regulation.
You can subscribe to the Priorities Podcast at prioritiespodcast.com and wherever you get your podcast. While you're there, be sure to leave a review or a rating on the podcast page. That small extra step helps more people like you find the show. This podcast is a production of Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher helped put it together. Until next week, I'm Sophia Fox-Owell. Thanks for listening.